Hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Study Chronicles. Today we're going to continue our button versus big blind scenario, but this time in the perspective of the big blind. We've already looked into some detail of in position single raise pots. This is going to cover a lot of the out of position strategy for single raise pots. So just like before, we're going to go over some of the ranges for the big blind defense, and then we're going to go into some drills so that we can practice what we've learned. All right, let's pull up the scenarios. So we have GTO Wizard. We're always using our 500 general GTO ranges, and the scenario is going to be button raises and the big blind defends. So we're going to be playing post flop out of position. So first of all, we want to take a look at what the most common sizing for the button is and then respond to that as the big blind. You know that I like to use the reports feature, which shows all of the overhead views of the strategy. So for the big blinds, first of all, the first thing that we see here is that we have a leading strategy. So in a single raise pot, when the button raises and the big blind defends, we're going to have this leading frequency. Even though it's low, there are certain textures in which the leading frequency is high, and those are going to generally be low card combos. So if we look here on the left side, you can see all of these different flop textures. Most of them are going to be 6 high, 5 high, 7 high. And that's primarily where our leads are going to be on these lower connected textures. And that's because we're defending combos that can make the nuts. On any 6-5 deuce board, we're going to have more 3-4. We're going to have pocket sixes, pocket fives, pocket twos, 5-2 suited, 6-2 suited. We're going to have all of these combos that the button perhaps doesn't have in their range. And so we actually end up having somewhat of a close range advantage. I don't know if it's if we have one, maybe on certain textures we have a range advantage. So for example, we can just click this board right here and open up the spot just to double check. But typically whenever you have these textures that interact very well with the range, you can compare them here and see that the best hands is in fact going to be in the big blind's favor, and they even have an equity advantage. So there are going to be textures, despite being the defense in this scenario, that we still have an advantage in. So these are good spots to lead. So keeping that in mind, there aren't too many other kind of board textures where we can lead. There are some sneaky ones, which are ace 5-3, which aren't very intuitive. I think a lot of people think that an ace high board is automatically going to be favored for the original aggressor. However, because there are multiple low cards with the ace, that means that there's some straights out there that the big blind is going to have that the button won't have. Hands like 4-2 suited. We're going to have things like 5-3 suited at a full frequency. We're going to have things like ace-3 offsuit that the button might not have at a full frequency. Perhaps, actually not ace-3, I take that back. But we do have ace-3 suited and ace-5 offsuit, which is still very relevant. And yeah, so we have a lot of strong hands. And again, we can take a look at the range. Now, the button does have the range advantage here for best hands and the equity advantage, but it's not that significant. There is it's not that big of an advantage because, again, we have all the straights. We have 5-5, we have 3-3, we have a lot of the two pairs. And so, yeah, there are some sneaky board textures like that are included in the leading range, but for the most part, you can feel pretty good about leading most boards 8 and under. So 8-7-5, 6-5-3, 4-3-2, and then monotone boards as well. So ace high monotone boards are actually also a fairly frequent lead because we have all of the weak suited kings and suited queens and suited jacks in our range, which means that's going to be where the range advantage lies, right? If you have more flushes or if you have the same amount of flushes on a monotone board, it makes sense that you have a similar range advantage. So yeah. So looking at that, we'll just remember when we're going through our drills that there are certain textures where we can have a lead. And then once we check, which is going to be the primary play here, 96%, I think a lot of people also simplify checking out of the big blinds. I think they just pure check after someone raises and they defend. Now, it's not that that's wrong, but it is missing out on a part of your strategy. If other players are doing it, it's going to be hard to know how to respond to it, right? So responding to a lead is a big part of playing in single raise pots. And I would suggest just taking a look through, different scenarios and practicing what their overall strategy is. So once we check, the most common sizing for button is going to be a 33% sizing, as we talked about in our last video. And big blind's response to that is going to be fourfold. So it's going to be folding, which is actually the least frequent, not the least, sorry. It's lesser frequent than the call. So calling and continuing is actually the most common thing you should be doing out of position from the big blind. So a lot of players are probably over folding in this node. I see it all the time at lower stakes. Players are just not check raising enough. They're not defending wide enough. And so it becomes easier for other players in position to just c-bet close to 100% of their range and get away with it too. This happens a lot in live poker as well. You'll see a lot of big blind defenses and then folds on the flop. So we have call being the most frequent and then fold. And then we have raise 50 and raise 100. So Wizard has chosen these two sizings because they're far enough apart that it makes sense that we want to use a large size and then a medium size. And so that's what we're going to use for our strategy. Now, what boards are we going to raise 50% on? Well, typically we're going to have a mix of different textures in which we're going to have a lot of strong hands, or we have a very polarized range for continuing. So paired boards particularly are good for check raising because we don't have that much interaction with them, but when we do, it's going to be very strong. We have a lot of like 9x in our range, 10x in our range. So we have a lot of trips, which are going to want to check raise for value. And then along with that, we can find a lot of weaker bluffs that have backdoor equity, like straights or flushes or two over cards. We can check raise lower pocket pairs for protection. There's a lot of things that we can check raise here on these paired boards. So we'll see that that's a high frequency spot. And then as you scroll down, it's going to be board textures again that are good for our range. So hands, boards like 7-5-4, 5 deuce deuce. These are lower cards that are going to be in our range, 6-4-2, that we can have a fairly high frequency of check raise. The ones that we're going to use the 100% on are going to be typically board textures that are not that good for our range or that interact very well. So textures like Ace Jack 7, where villain is going to have a range advantage and nuts advantage, but we want to continue at some frequency for raising. Well, we want to really polarize our range, right? We want to attack with a very large sizing because we can't really raise this board very light, right? We're either going to have 2 pair plus, we're not going to have too many weak 1 pair hands on this kind of texture, whereas on a texture like 8-7-4, maybe we would have a lot more top pairs. But on a texture like Ace Jack 7, where you don't really need that much protection for Ace X combos, it's more of a value raise, and then mixed in with a lot of polarized bluffing hands that have straight draws or flush draws or something like that. So yeah, so you'll see the use of 2 different sizings as a heuristic. I like to think about, okay, is this texture really good for me or is it bad for me? And then typically the boards that are good for us, we're going to go 50%, and the ones that are bad for us are going to go 100%. That's a very loose heuristic. Don't take that one to heart, but it did help me kind of get an idea of which texture would be better for the larger sizing. And you'll see a lot of ace high textures are going to fall in that raise 100 as well. So we're going to keep that in mind when facing a bet. All that said, let's look at what we're actually defending, right? So we looked a little bit of this yesterday, but we're going to go over this again real quick. We're lacking a lot of these 10s plus combos. The suited broadways, ace king, ace queen offsuit is in there, but at a very small frequency. And then we don't have very many weak offsuit combos. Out of position in a higher rake environment is typically going to have more folding in it. If there was less rake, we would see more defense from some of these combos on the fringe. And if there was more rake, then we'll probably cut back a little bit more and then start raising a bit more as well. Okay, so what else should we look at before we get into drills? Anything important? We have the lead. We have facing a small bet. Let's take a quick look at facing large bet. As a habit, I typically look at the most common sizing that the button is going to use, but it's also good to look at some of the other sizings. For example, let's say villain starts using an overbet, but let's look at the large bet. We'll look at the large bet. Because small and large are different enough to react differently to. And as you see, one trend that will happen when you start increasing the sizing of the button's c-bet, it'll use more of the smaller raise size. So it'll use more 50% versus the large sizing. And I think against the overbet, it almost exclusively uses 50% as the raise sizing. Yeah, so as you get larger in position, the sizing is going to shrink down for the big blind because the big blind needs less of a raise size to get all the money in, right? So it's not reducing the in position advantage that's already happening by the button using this really large sizing. Yeah. So important to look through and understand how your defense against a c-bet is going to change. And then turn stuff we're going to look at as it comes up in the drills. So let's create a drill over here. So yesterday, or last video, I should say, we looked at button versus big blind from the button perspective. This time we're going to look at the big blind perspective. So let's create a cash game, 500 GTO 100 stack size, 6 max looks good. And then we're going to do from the start, or no, sorry, RFI, not from the start. Starting spot is on the flop, single raise pots. There we go. Actually, I just should have clicked flop there. Single raise pots. Big blind is the hero. GTO is the button. And we're going to do any board texture. This is going to be all hands. There we go. Modes, we're going to do full hands. Oh, you know why this is like this? This is because I did a drill for Wizard not too long ago, so it switched off here. Learning mode off, low RNG, auto new hand instant, I think. This one doesn't matter. Oh no, we can take that off. We can put this on turbo. Off, actions, looks good. Okay. And then we can do button, Chronicle, big blind versus button, single raise pot. All right, let's get into this scenario. Big blind versus button, single raise pot, looks good. All right, we're in action. So the first thing that we have as a decision point is flop. Do we lead? Do we check? We have a very simple leading strategy, betting 33 or checking. We're not going to use a lot of different sizings, although maybe there are some textures where we can go larger sizings. As a simplicity adjustment, I'm just going to go with whatever wizard gives us here for this solution. And they chose a 33% lead. So we're going to use that. 10 high board. We're not going to lead 10 high boards very often. It's not as connected as those 8 high boards or the 7 high boards. And so I think this is going to be a pure check. So it goes check, check. Then on the turn, okay, so we reached our first node. If the action goes check, check, what's our play? Now, I think we're typically going to have large sizings on the turn, as we've discovered in past scenarios. But let me pull up this spot here. And then also I wanted to look at, so if it goes check. So I think check is about the same frequency as bet. So we're going to see a lot of checking back from the button. I don't think players are checking back enough. But if they do check back, they should be checking back balanced. They should be, they should be thinking about playing 3 streets, not just I'm going to check my weak hands, I'm going to bet my strong hands. So as the big blind, after the button checks back, we don't have this automatic bet. In fact, I think check is going to be the most common strategy, right? So on a 10-8-5 board, we'll see that after villain checks back in position, we're still checking 73% of the time. Right. So there's a lot of different textures in which we're going to check less or more. But on average, I would guess this check frequency is going to be over 50%. Now, we can't look at it through the aggregated reports for the overall turn strategy, but we can look at specific board textures. So I would play around with figuring out which texture you want to study and then just go through the turn strategy, right? So let's say we want to study a paired board and villain checks back on something like 10-10-5, right? And then the turn is an 8. How is that going to affect our sizing choices versus maybe a board texture like ace high? So here on a paired board, 10-10-5, you'll see the solver wants to use these 5 sizings. So we have 175 all the way down to 33. With 125 and 33 being the 2 most common sizings. So having a very polar size and then having a small size might be a good balance of strategy. Now let's say they check back something like an ace-king-5 board. This is a very strong board for villain. So I would think that we're checking even more. Yeah, we are. So we're checking even more here and having more of a polar sizing in response to the checks. We're less using this smaller bet. So on textures, again, that interact better with the other player on the turn, I think we're going to have more larger sizings. And on textures that interact better with the big blind, we're going to have more smaller sizings because more of our range is able to bet on the turn comfortably. So keeping an eye out for, even though the action went check, check on the flop, it's still important to understand how the flop interacts with both of the ranges, right? For the turn strategy. So in a scenario like this, when I have 10-3 and it goes check, check, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to have an overbet here with 10-3 because there is trips out there. We're going to have 8x that we can do that with. We're going to have maybe even ace-10 that we can do that with if we're going to use a 10. So with this hand, I think we're mostly going to see small bet or check, maybe some large bet, maybe some bet 75 at the largest, but I don't think we're going to have any of the overbets. So I rolled low. I think if I do want to bet this combo, I want to bet small or check. So let's try the small bet. Button calls and we get to the river. And now I think we're probably going to check at a very high frequency. This isn't a hand that gets very much value on this river. And we rolled very passive. So I like check. And versus check, villain checks back, and we win the hand. So looking at the hand on the turn, you can see that we mostly wanted to check. And if we did bet, it was the bet small there. So checking at a high frequency with this hand makes a lot of sense as well. Queen 8-3, not going to lead this board. So again, check, check. So we have a couple of different sizings. We know that maybe the solver prefers having a small sizing and an overbet, but maybe there's a medium sizing on a texture like this. I don't know. This hand doesn't really have much equity. Again, we talked about earlier episodes of having equity for semi-bluffing on turns when the action goes check, check. We'd rather have something like spades or a jack or a 10 or a 3, even for having some kind of semi-bluff here. This absolutely has no showdown value or equity on this texture. So I could see this being a pure check and then maybe bluffing the river. It is a check 100. And then on the river, I think we're going to just have a mix of bluffing this hand. I have a bad habit of just pure bluffing in this spot. And I think I'm supposed to like bluff like 40 or 50% of the time or something like that. So I'm going to check this time rolling a 57, but it wouldn't surprise me that this hand is a pure bluff. This is one of the absolute worst hands in our range. I don't think we can get much worse other than 4-5 suited and 6 highs, I guess, like 6-5 and 5-4. Those might be the only combos. 6-4, you know, if you want to get nitty about it, but 7 high is pretty dang low in our range. I'm going to go ahead and bluff this time. Damn. And villain calls with king 8. So looking at the bluff frequency, you'll see, yeah, see, this is a leak of mine. So I would put that in our notes here. So we've been taking notes along the way. So from the big blinds perspective, first of all, let's take some notes about what we were just learning prior. So leading lower textures, 6-5-4, and some ace wheel. So I denote wheel card as money sign W. It's a habit I have from working with other software, but that's what W is. Money sign W is wheel card or wheel card, any card, ace through 5. Big blind is responding with raising 50 or 100%. Raising 50 on textures on boards that interact well with range or paired boards, raising 100 on boards better for villain or boards we have high best hands frequency. Okay, so stuff like this is kind of like the notes that I'm taking for heuristics for future study. My camera is blocking the turn actions. Oh, sorry about that. I'll adjust that when we get back into it, I think. So what else did we learn from the big blinds? Facing c-bets, mostly checking after check, check. I don't know, just other notes that come to mind as I'm playing. Anyway, where's my leaks notes? I think I have, wasn't I taking, here we go, leak. So this was leaks for small blind versus big blind. We didn't put a leaks for this one yet, so we'll put that down here. Bluffing too much on river from big blinds after check, 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 check. So we're gonna moderate that. We're gonna monitor that and make sure that I don't continue that when I'm practicing. Okay. 4-3 suited on Jack 9-4. This is not a lead. And versus an overbet. Interesting. So we're facing an overbet. So one thing I can do actually is change the settings here so that you guys can see once it pops up. There should be an option. Pause game after action. There we go. So now it'll come up in the middle, so I'm not blocking the action on the right. Okay, so queen, queen, jack board, gonna check. Versus a bet. This is a texture that we may have a decent frequency of check raising on. However, paired boards are not all created equal. This is a paired board that is much better for villain than it is for us. So paired boards like 9-9 or 8-8 are going to be more likely to be check raised by us, but board textures like queen, queen, king, king, ace, ace, maybe not as often of a check raise, but still high frequency for continuing as a check raise. Going to fold this one this time, though. I don't think I want to float ace 5. Jack 10 2. Okay, so not a leading spot. However, we are going to check. And once it goes check, check, this is a texture that is really good for villain. We're going to have a lot of checks here. If I was going to have a bet on a board like this, I think I would start with a large sizing or check. Again, if we want to be value betting on this kind of board texture, we want to be very polarized. We can't really value bet something like ace 3. But because we have the spades, maybe there's a mix of a bet in there. I would guess that the most common thing here is check, and we rolled high, so I'm going to check. And as I was saying, we are going to either have a really large bet or some small bets most of the time with a little bit of large. But the takeaway here is going to be mostly check or over bet polarized with a little bit of this small sizing. So splitting up between the small sizing and polarized, again, is probably a good strategy for playing the turn. So do we get a very polarized check raising size here? Yes, I think if we were to check, are you talking about on the turn? If so, then I think, yes, we're going to be check over bet raising on the turn, perhaps, but we'll see. So once it checks down, now is our time to get in some value. So we either choose the small size or the large size. I don't think we're going to have an overbet with this combo particularly. So I think that this one is probably good for small sizing. Maybe we have some check as well. I rolled low, so I'm going to take a more aggressive action here. So I think if we're going to choose a sizing, it's going to be 36 or 73. Either is probably fine here. Let's go with the 73 this time. Damn, it was the 36. Okay. All right, next hand, 10-9-7, not good enough for us to be leading. I don't think we really want to have like a 8 high or lower board, so we're gonna mostly check. You can see the solver is trying to squeak in a lead here, but it's still not quite there. Now once we go to the turn, again, we can have a very polarized sizing, we can have a small sizing. Or we can check. And because we rolled the really passive number, I'm going to check here. This hand might not be a bad one to check raise, in fact, on the turn. But you will see we're mostly over betting on the turn with the flush draw like this. We have a gut shot, we have the flush draw, we have a jack over card. So pretty strong hand to bet turn with. But I do like check raising here if villain did bet. Now, once we get to the river, it's a matter of, I think it's a matter of what we're rolling, just keeping our frequency consistent for bluffing. We saw that with the 7 high combo earlier, that it was like a check like 70 or 80% of the time, right? So I think this is going to follow suit in terms of what hands to bluff with. We are blocking queen jack with our jack. Having spades in your hand, I think, is actually better for bluffing than not having spades, if I'm not mistaken. So I know this is my leak, but I think maybe we can bluff this hand I'm going to try again. Let's see if it works. All right, we got it this time. And in fact, we're pure bluffing this hand. So why is a hand like this going to be a pure bluff is my first question by the river. And I think I do have that heuristic where having spades is a better bluff, but let's take a look at what hands want to most bluff here. So if we filter for the trash hands, we'll find that we have a lot of the Jack X and the Queen X on the river. Now this makes a lot of sense because it's blocking hands like King Jack, King Queen, any of those kinds of combos, maybe also blocking stuff like Jack 10 that checked the flop and turn, Queen 10, maybe blocking pocket queens or pocket jacks. I don't think those hands are checking very much on turn though. But there is this trend of using the jack or the queen as a bluff because there's a straight on the board that requires queen jack. So anytime there's a certain hand that is the nuts on the board and you're blocking the nuts, it's still going to be good as a bluff because I think in theory, villain can still have queen jack in their range by the river. So if we look at the button's check back range on the flop and the turn, we're still going to see a frequency of queen jack checking back here. So you can see here, every one of the queen jack combos is going to still have a check back frequency. So it's still relevant that we are in fact blocking queen jack suited, queen jack offsuit. So that's going to be a major factor in picking a jack high or a queen high combo. And then also, if we have a bet here, let's say we pick the 73% sizing, a lot of the combos that villain is going to have to defend or to raise is probably going to have a queen or a jack in it. So if we highlight the call hands, the raise hands, and see where we block different combos with a jack. So like I said, we block Jack 10, that's going to get to the river at some frequency, Queen 10. A lot of these combos that are actually getting to the river, which I'm probably not checking enough, that's another leak. I need to be checking back more. Where's my leak? Not checking back enough with strength from button IP. So I think that's one of a lot of players' leaks is that they're just not checking back strong enough at a frequency. But yeah, so continuing, you know, what hands we're removing with a jack or a queen, you'll just see there's a lot of these middling combos around here, which are very relevant for us to have in our hand as a bluff. All of that, and we're probably going to get called by like something weak, right? Also, folding out ace high, really good, right? So, all right, jack high board, out of position. I don't think we're ever going to lead, so we're going to check. On the turn, on a flush completing turn, I think from studying before, I know that there's a mix of all the sizings. We can have a small, medium, large overbet. With this particular hand, I think it makes more sense to have a small or check. I don't think we want to use a large sizing with this combo. The large sizing is more reserved for like 2-pair plus hands. So I think this one's fine to have a small bet or check. I'm going to small bet this time. And we do see that the solver doesn't really want to use a large sizing, just a medium or small. And we get raised. We're not going to fold yet. Our hand is too strong. And now on the river, we're going to check and probably face a bet most of the time. But looks like villain raised with a6, having a gut shot in their hand. So their play is actually interesting. Because they're blocking hands like 7-6, right? The stronger hands from us, they're blocking hands like ace jack that are in our range that are going to bet call. So they do have some blocker properties on the turn. However, on the river, it's not so much of a great bluff because at that point, once we call, we still have flushes. We still have hands that are going to continue Jack X with a spade like I have here. So it looks like the solver wants to give up the 6 blockers and probably bluff something like an ace of spades or a king of spades on river. 986. This is getting closer to a lead. I think this one could be close. I think this one could be a lead, perhaps. But I'm going to go with a check just to be on the safe side. The 9-8 structure is still, I think, a little too high for the big blind to lead on. So we're going to check. Okay, there is this 8% lead. Seems good. And now facing a bet. This is the first time I think we faced a bet. Now, you know that we have a raise 50 and a raise 100 sizing. This texture, I think, would fall into the raise 50 most of the time. However, this 986 is a really good texture for us. It kind of hits a lot of our strong medium strength hands, like pocket sixes, like pocket eights, like pocket nines, like 10-7, like 7-5. We have all of those combos. So I could see us raising 100% here as well. I could also see us slow playing at some frequency. But I think the most common thing is going to be raise. I rolled an 83. That's really passive. I think I'm going to call, or let's go with a 50% raise. I think we're going to mostly raise to the point of we're only going to call around 10 or 15% of the time. Nope. So I grossly overestimated how often we were going to raise. Calling 63% of the time, not 15%. However, raise 50 is the raise size of choice. It looks like because the first thing I said, this board texture is really good for us. We can probably have these smaller raises as that heuristic that we talked about earlier. And yeah, so I guess raise 50 or call are both fine. Okay, so Glove, if you're still in chat, this is a spot where we check raise the flop and now we get to the turn. So what sizing do we want to use on the turn? This is going to vary between what turns come off, right? What does the dice and left mean? That's the RNG number. So that's just an RNG to help us make our decisions when we're indifferent to either raising or calling. So now once we've raised the flop and we get to the turn, I think depending on the turn, we're going to have different sizings. So when the flush comes in, that is going to encourage us to have smaller sizings. If the turn bricks, we're going to mostly have an overbet or check strategy. So on this turn, I think bet 50, 33, or check are all going to be good. I think the most common sizing on a flush completing turn is going to be bet 33. So I'm going to go with that now, and then we'll double check after. Yep, bet 33 and bet 50, like I was saying. Usually you're not going to try and push a lot of equity because when you check raise the flop, we're going to have sets, we're going to have two pairs, we're going to have straights. So we're not always going to have a flush. And when we get to the turn and the flush completes, villain is going to have a lot of flushes themselves when we don't have the flushes after calling a check raise, which means we don't want to be polarizing our range on the turn. We want to be betting a sizing that we can feel comfortable betting when we have sets. And then we can also balance that when we do have flush draws for the smaller or medium sizing, because we can get our money in most of the time on turn river anyway, right? So I would suggest, simplifying here to small and medium when the flush comes in. And then if we take a look at what happens when the turn breaks off, I think we're going to see mostly larger overbet sizings. So when the turn is interesting, also the frequency at which we're betting, right? We're betting close to 90% on the turn. Now, if this 4 was a diamond, I think that's going to significantly change our strategy. And you see, look how much we're checking on the turn now. And our sizings, like I was mentioning, are only going to be overbet and large bet. So it makes a huge difference on what the turn is to what our strategy is going to be. What happens if we put in a king, right? That's going to maybe help out the in position player, but our strategy is still going to be similar to the 4, in which a brick we're going to overbet or large bet. So it's important to really understand how the turns affect your strategy. But in this case here, when the flush card comes in, we're going to have a smaller medium bet. And now a straight completing card on top of a flush completing card. It's at this point where I think we are going to either have a check or a small bet. Now, I think this hand can do well for both. Hey, Teo coming in with a 5-month streak. Thank you. Really appreciate that. Sixes, yeah. I think small bet or check is going to be the play here. Really gross river. We're not really beating very much. That's going to call. And at this point, maybe we even get bluffed by hands that do want to call against us. I'm going to go with the small bet. We rolled aggressive. I don't think anything else is going to be an option here. Either bet 10 or bet 34. Okay, so it is check. It is check. Yeah, I do like check in theory. It does make more sense. And then we'll have like a small sizing with our straights or some flushes at a frequency maybe. Let's have a look on river. So we see here we have, yeah, bet 34 is the most common sizing. And then we have a little bit of bet 60, bet 84, and bet 10. But for the most part, I'm usually going to use the 34 sizing in this scenario with most of my range. And you'll see that a lot of even the nut flushes want to use this bet 34. So once the board texture completes the flush and then another straight, yeah, you want to have mostly those smaller sizings. Now, what hands are betting small on river? So you'll see some straights with the 7 as maybe the worst possible, maybe some 8s, small sizing. 6s is the worst set on the texture, so we're not really getting too much value from other hands, right? But when we have 8s, maybe it unblocks a certain set of combos. I don't know. You'd have to really dig deep and to figure out why each particular combo doesn't want to bet or check, but in general, using the small size is good with weaker hands. So I wasn't that far off with the pocket 6s, but yeah. All right, let's go over 2 more hands to cover this node. If you guys have any questions now, I'll take a few questions and look through them as well, pertaining to big blind versus button. So it goes check, check. Turn is an ace. So again, this is a spot where I think we're going to have an overbet or check. We want to be very polarized. This hand doesn't really fit into that polarized range, but maybe it does with a king of spades. Also blocking ace king. Also having a 9 is relevant here because we block 10-9 in combos that can continue like queen 9 and stuff. I rolled a 4. Can I ever overbet this hand? I think I want to have more equity. I think I want to have like actual spades or an actual gut shot straight draw. So like queen 9 would take priority over king 9 here. So I'm going to check this time. Looks like that's correct. And we're just going to check fold. All right, let's get in 1 more hand and then we'll jump into some play. Queen 10-6, not going to lead. Okay, so now we've picked up effectively an open-ended straight draw, right? We have a jack or a 7 completing our straight. We have good flush blockers as a queen and a heart and a spade, which is relevant here. So I think we can go ahead and bet overbet. And we saw the solver likes to use a lot of these 175 sizings and even 250 when we really want to polarize. So I'm going to use bet 175 here. And it looks like that is in fact a strategy, as well as bet 125. Mostly we're overbetting or checking with a little bit of the large sizing. We're not going to go 250 this time, but bet 175 is still good. And on the river, we make a pair, which typically you don't want to use pairs as a bluff. However, after overbetting the turn, the button has to have some equity to continue against that, right? So either it's something like a draw with a lot of equity, so something like queen jack King Jack of hearts, 5-6 of hearts, something with some of that equity that can continue. Or it's an ace or 10 in their hand. So something like King 10 or Ace 4, something that checked back on flop at a frequency. So do we want to turn a 9 into a bluff? I don't think so, because I think villain can still have bear spades, bear hearts, 6x with hearts, 8x with spades. I think we're going to see a lot of those hands that we can still beat with queen 9. So I think I'm going to check here and hope to see one of those combos show up. So there's the ace 4 that we talked about, right? That's part of their stronger check back range, but we are going to lose to that at some frequency. All right, button has a filtered range. Do they? Are you seeing the same hands over and over again? Is that? I don't think so. Okay. Oh, you're talking about the review one. Okay. All right. That's going to wrap it up, I think, for this episode. If you guys enjoyed it, please like and subscribe. I'm going to continue putting these out until we get all the way down the list of the spot importance. So to give you guys, an idea, we've gone through... Hey, Raging Spud, coming to the subprime. Thank you very much. Welcome to the expedition. Really appreciate that. So far we've gone through small blind versus big blind, and we just wrapped up button versus big blind. So next time we're going to go to hijack versus big blind. So for every configuration, we have 2 episodes, one playing in the in position perspective and one playing the out of position perspective. So if all is said and done and we actually get through everything, we're going to have like 70 or 80 episodes of this series. So a lot of content out there, all for free. I hope you guys enjoy it. And if you do, please, again, like and subscribe. It'll help support my channel. It'll help, incentivize me to keep putting out all of this fun, free content. And if you haven't, also check out my Twitch stream. I'm live right now with a bunch of the community going over this stuff, and they're going to ask questions after. So thanks again for tuning in, and I'll catch you on the next one.